Hey everyone, it's Emmy, and this is my final presentation for SLP 258. Speech. Speech is a process of the production using the muscle and motor aspects of the nervous system. That is how someone talks and communicates using words orally, as well as how a person can articulate specific words and sounds. Putting together sounds to create words and the layout of words with the flow and rate. And together that is articulation, voice, and fluency all in one, and how they are very important when it comes to speech. With speech, people do speak differently depending on the characteristics of voice developed as a child, which could be an accent, a dialect or an idiolect, or as well as how they pronunciate a specific word, because pronunciation is key when it comes to communication. An example or two of speech that I found was through articulation. It is the correct pronunciation of the sound S as well as the sound R. It could be TH, CH, SH, ending or beginning words, and just really how that is pronunciated. A voice can be high or low pitched. It also could be hyper nasal as well as hyponasal, which is really seen when a individual or child has had a cleft lip and or palate. And then fluency, which can be determined if there is stuttering or cluttering when an individual is speaking. Language. Language is a social system of communication which encompasses listening and speaking, reading and writing, as well as the use of symbols, which all convey meaning. Language can be different from country to country and even in particular regions within the country. So the language that we speak here in America may be and is completely different than what an individual in their language is like in a different country. Typically, language is shared between groups of similarity. Some examples of language is really just knowing the meaning of a word in the same language. So I'm using fan as an example. So a fan is a device which cools you down, especially in those hot South Carolina summer days. Or I could be a fan of a sports team, specifically the Carolina Gamecocks. The same word in different languages, such as water and cookies. So in English, water is what we say, and water is what you drink. But in Spanish, an individual would say agua. Cookies can be perceived as a little sweet chocolate chip cookie that we eat, and what we say in English, but in British English, the individual would say a biscuit. Communication is the process of using words and or symbols which allow context for meaningful ideas which can be expressed or received. Some examples of communication. There's nonverbal communication, which is the use of facial expressions, which I believe is key when communicating, because facial expressions can really lead an individual to interpret how they are feeling in the midst of a conversation. There's visual communication, which could be social media and presentations, which I am doing now, as well as written communication, which consists of texting, emails, and letters, which is a form of communication which is not technically face-to-face, but it is still getting what you need across to the other individual. The components of language, there's form, which consists of phonology, morphology, and syntax. There's content, which is semantics, and use, which is pragmatics. The domains of language are as well phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. So phonology is the study of production and execution of speech sounds and the correct forms for each. The use of various sounds which are used to create understandable words. So if a word is not understandable, it is very hard to interpret what the individual is saying, so understanding the word would be very important, especially when it comes to phonology. An example of phonology, I found the IPA chart to be really helpful, especially in classes I'm currently taking as well as in the future, because a child can pronounce the word funny as punny or jump as dump, which is a form of stopping, which is a phonological process. So it's really important to understand and process what each process is and how it works and how to assess a child if they are having issues with that specific process. Morphology is really how words relate to each other in the same language and how they are formed. So knowing how to use a word correctly in a sentence is key, as well as taking the simplest form of a word and building upon it to make it more complex. Some examples of morphology: a word that can be used in different forms that mean the same. So my base word, or my smallest form over morpheme, is color. And so in a sentence, I would say I want to color. To make it a little more complex, I could add in a sentence, I colored in the lines. In the most complex form in a sentence could be, coloring is very calming to me. Syntax. Syntax is understanding of the sentence production with the correct words used for comprehension. An example of syntax. So I did the incorrect use as well as the correct use in a sentence form. So the incorrect use is, I like dress red girl wear, which obviously does not make any sense. So having the correct use in a sentence to better understand what the individual is saying would be, I like the red dress that the girl is wearing, which is much more understandable. Semantics is how a speaker conveys the message with tone and correct use of words. That is the meaning of a word or phrase and how individuals interpret the meaning. Or an example of semantics would be how a mother versus a child interprets what each other are saying. So a mother could say, let's go, meaning, come on, it's not time to go. We need to get up, get rid of what we're doing and leave. Whereas a child may say, or may think the mother is saying, let's go play something else, or let's go do chores, or let's go outside, where it just is really just not a full understanding. So using that let's go with different use of your tone would be really helpful when it comes to semantics. Pragmatics. Pragmatics is how we communicate in social situations with language, and it's how we express our thoughts to other people in the correct manner. An example of pragmatics would be I used a social situation such as a church, and in a church, the mother might say to a child to use your inside voice, because in church you are to be quiet, because that is not a disruptive place. And for really any social situation where it is to be quiet, the mother may say to a child with simple words to use your inside voice, and if they are not fully understanding, that's when more complex words would come into play. The 5 speech subsystems, they are respiration, phonetation, articulation, resonance, and prosody. So respiration is taking a breath, which could be long or short, and allowing oxygen into the lungs and releasing carbon dioxide from the lungs. The contributions of respiration to speech production. It is needed for speech production because of the airflow through the lungs. The flow of air causes the vocal folds to vibrate, which is how sound is created. And it is really all about the breath. The longer the breath, the more words can be produced. Phonetation is how air travels through and in the vocal folds, and it provides vibrations, which make sound. The contributions of phonetation is pretty much that it is the main mechanism of speech, and it is how speech sounds are uttered when air passes through the vocal folds. Articulation. Articulation is the use of creating sounds correctly for speech. I added pronunciation because if you are not able to articulate and fully pronounce a word, it will not be understandable. So having the ability to fully articulate and produce the correct speech sounds is very key when it comes to this process. the contributions of articulation. There are many components when it comes to this process, and especially for speech production, because there are many aspects and structures that have to work together. The structures include the teeth, lips, soft palate, and tongue, and when they work together, they are able to produce speech sounds. Resonance is how the voice is created from sound vibrations in the vocal tract. And the contributions include the quality of voice, which is very present in how a voice can be amplified in shape, which is your tone of voice. You can have a loud voice or a soft voice, as well as a smooth tone or bumpy tone when speaking. And prodicey is how a vocal message can convey emotions and allow the listener to be able to understand the full content of a message. The contributions of this would be how an expression of a voice can be shown. It allows for listeners to determine expressions and meaning of words being spoken, so really being able to interpret what is being said. I added this anatomical image because I believe that all these structures are very important to remember and to always know, because as they all are working together, it is able for speech sounds and production to be made. So my first article is Neuroimaging of the Syllable Repetition Task in Children with Residual Speech Sound Disorder. The article stated that the researchers compared MRI images to see the phonological and speech neurological differences between typically developed children versus children that have residual speech sound disorder. The researchers were expecting to find some differences between the two cohorts, but were unable to successfully show any significant changes of brain images during their experiment. The research article did discuss findings from other researchers that showed altered phonological and speech processing in several neuroimaging studies. However, none of these were explicit to residual speech sound disorder. The application of that article into the field of SLP is just really being able to understand the neurological defects in children with speech disorders, because that is important for us to know so that we are able to provide specific treatment for the best outcomes. And I also believe that we should be able to strive to learn the functions of the brain and how those functions affect language. My second article is Compensation to Altered Auditory Feedback in Children with Developmental Language Disorder and Typical Development. So the authors or researchers here in this article discussed how researchers have used the DIVA model and the simple DIVA model to show the differences in auditory feedback spontaneously. Feedback and learning rate is specific speech motor control. The experiment in this article was shown how auditory feedback can overcompensate in some developmental language disorder children, as well as undercompensated depending on altered auditory signal. The researchers did show that compensation was different in the two groups and that the developed language disorder group had atypical results of auditory feedback. The application from that article into the field is, I believe that auditory feedback is important for SLP students to understand how someone hears their own voice can affect their speech production. It is also important that we have a good understanding of developmental language disorders for the best therapy to improve language and speech skills. My reflection from this assignment provided me with a deeper insight on speech and language. Speech and language are two of the most important aspects of SLP, which is my future career. And so being able to dig deeper into how much speech and language can affect an individual is critical in many ways. Along with speech and language comes communication. Communication is a way of expressing specific things which come in many forms. So together, speech, language, and communication are equally important to people in their everyday lives. And if there is a probability that an individual is missing one, I hopefully one day will be able to assist them and provide them with the opportunity. And these are my references. Thank you.